The alley reeked of damp concrete and desperation as Denzel Washington turned the corner. A flickering street lamp cast jagged shadows, illuminating a badge glinting in the dark ahead. Officer Marcus Kane stepped forward, his smirk sharp enough to cut through the night air. "End of the line, Washington," he sneered, his hand resting heavy on his holstered gun. The actor's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing at the corrupt cop blocking his path. This wasn't a movie set. This was real, and the stakes were suffocatingly high. Denzel stopped, his breath steady, knowing one wrong move could end it all. Kane's voice dripped with venom as he paced, his boots scraping the wet pavement. "You've been poking around where you don't belong, asking questions about my precinct." His fingers twitched near the gun, a predator toying with prey he'd already cornered. Denzel stood tall, his silence louder than the distant hum of city traffic beyond. The cop laughed, a hollow sound echoing off graffiti-stained walls surrounding them. "I'm the law here, and you're just a man who talks pretty for a living." But something in Denzel's unflinching gaze made Kane's grin falter, just for a second. The air grew thick, charged with the unspoken threat hanging between the two men. Kane pulled his gun, leveling it at Denzel's chest, his eyes gleaming with dark intent. "You think you're untouchable because people cheer your name on some big screen?" His voice rose, sharp and unsteady, betraying a crack in his ironclad confidence. Denzel's hands stayed loose at his sides, no hint of fear crossing his weathered face. "I know who you are, Kane," he said, his tone low, steady, cutting through the tension. The cop froze, the barrel trembling slightly as Denzel's words hit like a quiet storm. A distant siren wailed, but it was too far to matter in this shadowed showdown. Kane's smirk returned, forced, as he tightened his grip on the cold steel trigger. "I've buried bigger names than yours, Washington. Your movies won't save you now." Denzel took a slow step forward, his presence filling the alley like a rising tide. The cop barked a laugh, but his eyes darted, searching for control he was losing fast. "You don't scare me," Kane snapped, though his voice betrayed a flicker of doubt. Denzel's next move wasn't loud or fast, but it was about to change everything. Denzel's eyes locked onto Kane's, unyielding as the alley seemed to shrink around them. He took another step forward, his voice calm but carrying the weight of a thunderclap. "You think this gun makes you powerful, Kane, but it's just a prop in your hands." The cop's face twisted, anger flaring as Denzel's words stripped away his bravado piece by piece. Kane's finger hovered over the trigger, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool night. "You don't know what you're messing with," he growled, his voice cracking under pressure. But Denzel's steady gaze told a different story. He knew exactly what he was facing. A rat skittered across the alley, its claws clicking against the concrete, breaking the silence. Kane flinched at the sound, his gun dipping for a split second before he recovered. Denzel seized the moment, his voice cutting deeper than any blade could hope to reach. "I've seen men like you before, hiding behind badges, afraid of their own shadows." The cop's smirk vanished, replaced by a snarl as his control slipped further away. He raised the gun higher, desperation creeping into his stance. But Denzel didn't waver. The alley held its breath, waiting for the spark that would ignite this. "Powder keg?" Kane's chest heaved as he barked. "You've got no proof. Just talk. No one will believe you." His words echoed off the walls, but they sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Denzel tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Deliberate, knowing. "Proof's already out there, Kane. Your precinct's dirty, and I've got the receipts." The cop's eyes widened, a flicker of panic breaking through his mask of authority. He'd heard whispers, someone digging into his deals, his bribes, but not Denzel Washington. The gun shook in his hand as the realization hit this wasn't just a random encounter. Rain began to fall, soft at first, tapping against the pavement like a quiet drumbeat. Denzel's coat glistened under the street lamp, his presence growing larger with every drop. "I met a kid last week," he said, his voice steady, piercing through the drizzles. Rhythm, 15 years old, scared, said, You roughed him up for asking the wrong questions. Kane's jaw clenched, his mind racing to recall the incident Denzel was dragging into light. "You're lying," he spat, but his voice trembled, betraying the lie he couldn't hide. Denzel's smile faded, replaced by a look of steel. Justice was coming, and Kane knew it. The rain grew heavier, soaking Kane's uniform, his badge now a dull blur of metal. He stepped back, his boots splashing in shallow puddles, gun still aimed at Denzel's chest. "You're bluffing," he hissed, though his voice wavered, like a man grasping at straws. Denzel didn't flinch, his eyes steady, rain streaking down his face like tears he'd never shed. "That kid's name was Jamal," he said, each word deliberate, heavy with unspoken accusation. Kane's grip faltered, the gun dipping slightly as the name hit him like a punch. He remembered Jamal, the nosy teenager, the one he'd silenced with a fist and a threat. A car horn blared somewhere nearby, its echo swallowed by the alley's suffocating walls. Kane's head jerked toward the sound, his nerves fraying under Denzel's unrelenting presence. "You can't prove a damn thing," he snapped, but his eyes betrayed a growing fear. Denzel's voice dropped lower, cutting through the rain like a blade through fragile skin. "I don't need to prove it yet. Jamal's alive, and he's ready to talk, Kane." The cop's breath hitched, his mind scrambling to recall how much the kid actually knew. Denzel stood there, unshaken, a pillar of calm in the storm of Kane's unraveling world. Kane's face twisted into a snarl, desperation clawing its way. Out of his trembling frame, "You think you're some hero, Washington? This city chews up men like you daily." He waved the gun wildly, rain dripping from the barrel, his control slipping with every word. Denzel took a slow breath. His hands still loose, his posture radiating unshakable resolve. "I'm no hero," he said quietly, "but I'm not the one shaking in my boots now." The cop's eyes darted, searching for an exit, a lie, anything to regain his footing here. But Denzel's words pinned him down, heavier than the rain soaking through his bones. Thunder rolled again, a deep growl that seemed to echo the fury building in Kane's chest. He lunged forward, aiming to snatch the recorder, but the second figure blocked him fast. "You're done," the leader said, pressing play. A faint, scared voice crackled through the rain. "Stay quiet, kid, or you're next," Jamal's words played. "Each one a nail in Kane's coffin," Kane roared, swinging his gun toward Denzel, his desperation boiling into reckless, blind rage. Denzel's eyes hardened, his body tensing. He knew this was the moment it all turned. The alley pulsed with chaos, rain and thunder framing a showdown no one could escape. Thunder rumbled low, shaking the alley as rain lashed against the cracked concrete walls. Kane's eyes flicked upward, then back to Denzel, his gun trembling in the storm's fury. "You've got no way out," he snarled, voice hoarse, barely audible over the roaring downpour. Denzel stood still, water streaming off his coat, his silence more menacing than any shout. Then a sound cut through the rain, tires screeching, headlights piercing the alley's dark veil. Kane spun toward the light, his gun wavering as a black SUV skidded to a stop. Denzel didn't move, but his eyes narrowed. He knew this wasn't part of the plan. The SUV's doors flew open, two figures in hoods leaping out, their silhouettes blurred by rain. Kane's head snapped between them and Denzel, confusion twisting his already frantic expression. "Who the hell are you?" he barked, swinging his gun toward the newcomers with wild aim. One figure raised a hand, calm, unshaken, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We're here for him," he said, nodding toward Denzel, his tone cold and businesslike. Kane's laugh was sharp, jagged, a man teetering on the edge of control and collapse. Denzel's jaw tightened, friends or foes. These strangers just raised the stakes even higher. Lightning cracked again, bathing the alley in stark white light, revealing the figures' faces briefly. The leader was young, sharp-eyed, his hoodie soaked, but his posture rigid with purpose. "We've been watching you, Washington," he said, stepping forward. ignoring Kane's shaking gun. Denzel's voice was low, cutting through the storm like a blade honed by years of grit. "Watching me doesn't mean you know me. State your business or get out of here." Kane's eyes darted, his mind racing. Were these allies or more enemies closing in? Fast? The second figure stayed silent, hands in pockets, but his stare locked onto the corrupt cop. Rain pounded harder, turning the alley into a shallow river, soaking Denzel's boots through. Kane's gun swung back to Denzel, his voice rising in a panicked, furious crescendo now. "You set this up, didn't you? Bringing backup to take me down in my own turf?" Denzel's expression didn't shift, his calm a stark contrast to Kane's unraveling desperation. "I don't need backup to handle you," he said, his words steady, dripping with quiet power. The leader smirked faintly, stepping closer, unfazed. By the gun or Kane's frantic shouting, "Time's up, officer. Your precinct's secrets aren't safe, and neither are you anymore." Kane's face drained of color, the rain plastering his hair flat against his sweating forehead. His gun swung wildly between Denzel and the hooded leader, his control shattering fast. "You're all in on this," he shouted, voice cracking, as the storm swallowed his bravado whole. Denzel stood like a rock, his eyes shifting briefly to the newcomers, assessing their intent. The leader's smirk widened, his hand slipping into his pocket, pulling out a small recorder. Jamal's voice is on here, Kane. Every word you said to him recorded clear as day. The cop's breath hitched, his gun arm trembling as the weight of exposure crashed down. Thunder rolled again, a deep growl that seemed to echo the fury building in Kane's chest. He lunged forward, aiming to snatch the recorder, but the second figure blocked him fast. "You're done," the leader said, pressing play. A faint, scared voice crackled through the rain. "Stay quiet, kid, or you're next." Jamal's words played, each one a nail in Kane's coffin. Kane roared, swinging his gun toward Denzel, his desperation boiling into reckless, blind rage. Denzel's eyes hardened, his body tensing. He knew this was the moment it all turned. The alley pulsed with chaos, rain, and thunder, framing a showdown no one could escape. Kane's finger tightened on the trigger, his scream lost in the storm's relentless, howling fury. Denzel moved, swift, deliberate, closing the gap before the cop could fire a single shot. His hand clamped onto Kane's wrist, twisting hard, forcing the gun toward the wet ground. A sharp crack rang out as the weapon hit pavement, skittering away into the shadows. Kane stumbled back, eyes wide with shock, his power stripped away in one fluid motion. Denzel loomed over him, rain dripping from his face, his voice low and unyielding now. "You don't get to bury this, Kane. Not Jamal, not me, not the truth anymore." The leader stepped forward, holding the recorder high, Jamal's voice still echoing faintly through. Kane sank to his knees, the rain pooling around him, his badge meaningless in the mud. "You think this ends me?" he gasped, his voice raw, clinging to defiance despite defeat. Denzel crouched low, meeting Kane's eyes, his presence a quiet storm of righteous strength. "It's not about ending you," he said, each word deliberate, heavy with unshakable resolve. "It's about starting something. Justice doesn't hide in alleys, not after tonight." The second figure nodded silently, pulling a phone from his pocket, already dialing for backup. Police cars screeched to a halt, doors slamming as officers poured into the soaked alley. Kane scrambled to his feet, slipping, his voice a desperate plea lost in the downpour. "It's a setup. Washington's lying." He yelled, but his words drowned in the storm's roar. Denzel stood aside, calm, watching as two cops grabbed Kane, wrenching his arms back. The leader approached an officer, handing over the recorder with a nod of quiet triumph. "Everything you need's on there," he said, his voice firm, sealing Kane's fate for good. Denzel's eyes met the leader's. A silent understanding passed between them in the rain. Kane thrashed as cuffs snapped onto his wrists, his shout swallowed by the thunder's growl. "You'll pay for this, Washington," he spat, his face a mask of rage and ruin. Denzel didn't respond, his silence louder than any threat Kane could muster now. The officers dragged him toward a cruiser, his boots scraping uselessly against wet stone. The leader turned to Denzel, rain streaking his hood, his expression a mix of respect. "You didn't just take him down. You gave us a chance to fix this city." Denzel nodded once, his gaze distant, the weight of the night settling into his bones. The rain softened to a drizzle, the storm's fury fading as Kane's cruiser pulled away. Denzel stood under the dim street lamp, its light casting a halo through the misty air. The leader approached, peeling back his hood, revealing a face lined with quiet determination. "Name's Marcus," he said, extending a hand, his voice steady despite the night's chaos. Denzel shook it, his grip firm, the weight of their shared victory passing between them. "You didn't have to step in," Denzel said, his tone low, gratitude threading through it. Marcus smiled faintly, raindrops clinging to his lashes. "Some fights are worth joining." A cold wind swept through, tugging at Denzel's coat as he stood in quiet reflection. He'd faced down guns before. On screen, in roles that echoed this very moment, but this was different, raw, the kind of real that sank deep into a man's soul. Marcus clapped his shoulder, breaking the silence. "You're more than an actor, Washington." Denzel's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "I'm just a man who doesn't look away." The words hung there, simple but heavy. A truth. Forged in the fire of that alley. Marcus nodded, understanding. Some men fight because they can't do anything else. The last police car rolled out, its taillights fading into the wet, glistening city streets. Denzel glanced at Marcus, then at the second figure, who'd stayed. Silent all along. "You've got a story now," he said, his voice carrying a challenge wrapped in calm. Marcus grinned, pulling his hood back up. "And we'll tell it, starting with tonight." The second figure finally spoke, his voice rough. "People need to know what you did." Denzel looked away, toward the horizon, where dawn hinted at breaking the darkness. "Justice isn't loud," he murmured, "but it echoes if you give it a voice." The drizzle stopped, leaving the alley quiet, its echoes of struggle washed away clean. Denzel adjusted his coat, the damp fabric clinging to his frame, heavy but bearable now. Marcus watched him, his eyes sharp, like he was memorizing every detail of this night. "You've started something big," he said, his voice firm, carrying a spark of hope. Denzel met his gaze, his own eyes reflecting the faint glow of the approaching dawn. "It's not about me," he replied. "It's about what happens when people stop hiding." The second figure nodded, stepping closer, his silence breaking into a quiet, firm agreement. A lone bird chirped somewhere above, its sound cutting through the city's waking hum. Denzel turned to leave, his boots splashing softly in the last puddles of the storm. Marcus called after him. "Jamal'll never forget this. Neither will this city, Washington." Denzel paused, half turning, his face etched with a resolve that needed no words. "Then let's make sure it's a story worth telling," he said, his voice steady, final. He walked into the dawn, a man who'd faced darkness and left it forever. Changed. The alley stood empty, but its silence roared with the promise of justice reborn. Marcus pulled out his phone, his fingers tapping fast, already drafting the night's tale. The second figure watched, his rough voice breaking the stillness. With sudden conviction, "People hear this and stand up. Kane's just the first domino to fall here." Denzel's silhouette faded into the morning light, a legend growing larger with each step. The city stirred, unaware yet of the ripple one man had set loose tonight. Marcus hit send. A single line glowing. "Denzel Washington took down corruption. Believe." It somewhere, Jamal smiled in his sleep, safe, because someone had fought for him. Denzel Washington faced down corruption and won. But what about you? When darkness corners you, do you run or fight? Drop your answer in the comments right now. We want to hear what you'd do in his shoes. If this story fired you up, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and hit subscribe for more moments of justice that hit hard. The next chapter's up to you. Don't miss it.